Why does anybody like anything? Why do I like anything? I don't know. What I do know is that everybody has their own reasons for liking things. Nobody's has the exact same perspective in life. Uh, Now, people's perspectives are not so different from each other's, especially people from the same culture. Like if you're from America, you share a lot in common with somebody else who's from America. You both eat with forks, probably. You uh, have a general understanding of what America is like. Cultural differences are probably the biggest difference in perspective that people have, and it's why foreign works of art are often harder to get into for some people, just because you don't have that shared cultural understanding with the author. Where with an author from uh, the same place that you are from, or just from a similar culture, you'll have things that go unsaid. You'll have pieces of information that just don't need to be stated because you should already be familiar with them. If a character does something normal, why should you draw attention to it? But the issue arises then that somebody from another culture, another country entirely, where they do things completely differently, because the fact is, different cultures do things very differently. It's just a fact of the world. Uh, you know, Certain things that you take for granted, uh, they don't, and they do things perhaps even in an opposite way. And so for them, if they really wanted to get the full experience of like understanding why a character is doing that, they would have to have that explained to them. They would have to have that cultural difference explained to them. Um, and this can be overcome if you're willing to learn, and you're just able to accept that people do things differently in different places, and sort of chalk anything you don't understand up to that, and then just research it later. I mean, there's ways of getting around it. Foreign media is not impossible to get into. I mean, so many people are into anime. So many people are into K-pop. I mean, and that's just Asian markets, especially since Asian markets that have been highly westernized. But I mean, it's still not Western media. It's Eastern media, so it's different. They have different ways of doing things. They have different ways of even telling stories. Um, Fundamentally, the types of literature that Japanese or Eastern storytelling is based on is completely different. They're all based on a journey to the West, whereas everything here is based off of like the Odyssey and shit like that. It's like a difference between like a cast of characters versus your prime hero. I think other people have talked about this. I'm not going to dwell too much on this point, because I'm just using it as an example of cultural differences, which is not the point of this video. But it is important to understand when you're talking about why people like things. Because it's understandable that somebody who has no exposure to Japanese media would just flat out not like anime, especially if they have their entire lives spent only consuming media from America or from the West, usually just from America if they're American. It's understandable because everybody has their own perspective, and that's sort of the whole point that I'm trying to make. But you can't become short-sighted by this and say that because everybody has their own perspective, that every perspective is as equally good as every other perspective. That's just not true. Other perspectives, you know, may be more informed than other perspectives. They may have more cultural context. That's a big one. But also, just like if the piece of media is something that has a lot of references to things or has a lot of deeper meanings, I suppose, that maybe somebody might not pick up on. Somebody who does pick up on them I would say that their perspective is a little bit more well-rounded. Um, Now, when it comes to what is most important to me, uh, I would say cohesion, and this is very, very broad because the I think a matter of perspective also applies in reverse as well. Whereas every work is sort of individual, whereas uh, every person is individual, so everything that they create will be unique as well. You could look at any specific element or any individual piece of a work and chop it up and say, I really like this thing, I really like this thing, I don't like this thing, and I really like this thing. Therefore, I'll give it a 3 out of 4. Because I liked 3 out of the 4 of the different elements. But I think this is kind of a retarded way of going about things because at the end of the day, it all comes together to form a single piece of media. So what you should be looking at is how each of those different things comes together to create a cohesive piece of media. Now, of course, this is just my perspective. And I'm sure other people out there have a different perspective, a different way of looking at things. But I think this way of looking at things just generally logically holds up better than judging things more on taste. Where taste would be just sort of making surface level judgments about whether or not you liked something about it. You liked this because the main character had a certain style to him, because you liked the soundtrack, because you just liked something about it. There was just something you liked. Whereas I think what really makes a work good, and you can see this in all of the works that become highly regarded, is that all of them, each element, all come together to form something that works really well. Like if the work is really sad, a cohesive work will have every single element trying to portray that. It's not going to have any piece of itself not try to make the point. Now, most works don't try just to portray like a single thing, obviously. They're usually a lot more nuanced and multi-layered than that. So the different elements sort of have to work a little harder to try to portray something that, is more true to life than what I think mediums like music can almost get away with, which is just like portray a single emotion as best you can. But like with something like anime, for example, because I am an anime channel technically, I think, is it's usually telling stories as opposed to just like portraying something. And when you're telling a story, you're telling something about characters, and characters are representations of people, and people are not tethered by what a story wants them to be. That's the thing. They are themselves. They just do what they want to do, what they think is right, based on their thoughts and emotions, not based on the overall tone of a piece of media. That's not how people work. And so I think a lot of the best pieces of media tend to sort of have a tonal dissonance to them almost, where you could say that that's not cohesive because you have a scene right after the other going from like a super somber moment to sort of a comedy scene, which is something that anime does a lot, which is not something Western media does quite as often. And so people accuse anime of having tone shifts. But I think this is totally fine because oftentimes it's done usually for a pretty good reason. Now, obviously, there's a lot of schlock out there, so sometimes it is just poorly executed, and when that's the case, yeah, fair enough. But I think dismissing that entirely kind of misses the point, because it's just another thing that can be done well or it can be done poorly. And just because oftentimes it is done poorly because it's kind of hard to execute, a tone shift is a little bit of a difficult thing to get right. Um, People will dismiss it, and I think that's one of the biggest issues of trying to like apply objective definitions to a work, is that your judgments based on one thing, not working here, uh, doesn't always apply, because again, things are not just a collection of elements. They are a collection of elements that are all working together to make something bigger than themselves. The best pieces of media are always described as being greater than the sum of their parts. That, when you hear that phrase, that means this work is probably very cohesive, because for something to just be as good as the sum of their parts, that means, yeah, everything they did was done well, but it didn't really come together. It just sort of stood as almost just like, I think Hideo Kojima used a metaphor for like a museum for his games or something like that, where it's like you're just sort of taking in one piece of it as like sort of a piece in a museum, and then you're moving on to the next and the next and stuff like that. And I kind of hate that. I think that kind of sucks, because why not just fucking make something in that medium, like if you're making something in a multimedia medium such as a video game or an anime, like everything kind of has to justify its existence. Otherwise, you might as well just go make something else. You have to have a reason for existing in the medium that you exist in. And being cohesive is, I think, one of the only, I don't want to call it objective, but it's one of the only sort of universal rules that I've found when it comes to just any media, because it's so broad, and it doesn't box anything in. It doesn't box any piece of media into doing like a specific thing. It has no regard for any rules. It's just saying it has to work well together. Like each thing just has to work well together. It doesn't matter what they're working well, together to do. If that sentence made any sense. It just matters that they work together, and nothing more. Because if they work together, then congratulations, you did it. And then we can look deeper and understand in what ways they worked well together, and what they're saying, what they're doing, and then depending on how well you executed on that, like there's different levels within that. Like if something's super deep, that's going to be better than something that's just as cohesive, but maybe a little bit shallower. So it's not an instant way of recognizing quality. It's just sort of like a general standard, a general sort of benchmark, a way of looking at things to help you understand, how things work, really. Because it's very easy to just look at any specific thing, but then you have to go a little bit of a step further to make the connection between how they work together, especially when pieces of media are so complex. I don't know. I've been having a little bit of a difficult time getting my thoughts into words recently, which it happens from time to time. I guess people call it writer's block, but this has lasted a very long time, and I'm not 100% sure why. I don't know, but I'm working on a review right now, and I'm not really sure where I'm taking the channel. I don't know. I made a bunch of decisions that I am probably going to rescind. I don't know. that I think that phrase sort of sums up my philosophy on life is I don't know. I don't really know what's going on. I feel very disconnected from just about everything. And all I know is when media works, it works. So you just have to understand why it works. And that's the hard part. But I enjoy doing it. I don't know where I'm going with this. I think I already made my point. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about anymore.